Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm Jim Bird. If you don't know me or know me, we're going to talk about Camp Nooksack today. And Camp Nooksack is the only nationally recognized historical site in this part of the Nooksack Valley. It, of course, does not exist anymore, but it was the only national recognized historic site in this area, the last one. Some of you know that some of us were involved in an effort to preserve it some 10 years ago, and that did not succeed. So it is now full of houses, and the camp is gone. And Carl's comes from a family. We have Carl Crouse here today to talk about it, and he comes from a family who was very involved in it for, well, decades at least. And he was born while they were involved in it, so he's much younger, of course. He was the age of my children. He went to school with my children, but I do recognize him as an elder now, so we will let him.
What does that make you, Jim?
Ancient.
Okay. The Nooksack Campground, a great treasure. The Nooksack Campground is a great treasure, and it's a monument of days gone by. But it's a living treasure whose message still continues. And that's what's important to me. And even though the message taken a lot of forms in different ways, it does continue. So I'm proud of the story of the Nooksack Campground. It truly is a great treasure. The old Nooksack Campground was a place that made a positive impact on thousands and thousands of people over the decades. It was established in the 1890s, but I'm going to go back a few decades before the 1890s, and I wasn't around, and neither was Jim before then, I'm sure, right?
Right.
But to the earliest roots, where did it come from? Why was it in Nooksack, of all places? Why Nooksack? I mean, probably for many of you, it's been there, and it's just kind of there. But where did it come from? And it's not so much how it came to be, but why. And that's really the more important thing to me. We'll get into the campground as a place of revival meetings, youth camps. Baptistry was a part of it. My brother just learned there was a baptistry there in years gone by. I have a great list of those who were baptized in 1902, including my grandmother, so that's pretty cool. We'll get into the campground as a place where thousands of people over a century found a renewed faith in God. And if we can't say that's what it's about, we're missing the whole thing. So that's what it was. We'll paint a picture of Camp Nooksack, some of the giants of old, highlights of the history, but most importantly, the Nooksack Campground's greatest legacy is the message that gave birth to the campground. A few buildings remain. The old memory house that's and the dining hall, and they've today been converted into private homes. The Happy Row is there. At least one of the buildings. I'm not sure what that's used for today. Do you know, Jim?
They're all houses.
They're all houses. That's a house, too. Okay.
All been converted to houses.
The Nooksack Campground was established by early Advent Christians. It's a Christian movement that started in the East, and it expanded across this nation all the way to the West and into Canada. So it's really part of even the development of the United States. The message was simple. No matter how dark the world may seem, have hope, for Jesus Christ will soon return. That's it. That was the message. That's the purpose. Today, all conservative Christians believe in the soon return of Jesus Christ. But at the time, it was a newly discovered Bible-based message that had waned. Advent refers to the second coming of Jesus Christ. And by the way, just for the record, the Nooksack Campground is founded by Advent Christians, which is distinctly different from Seventh-day Adventists. And that question just comes up all the time. So just two different groups. In the book of Acts, in the New Testament, Jesus has already been raised from the dead. He's shown himself to a number of people on earth, and he ascends into heaven. Acts 1 verse 10 says of the witnesses of the ascension, they were looking intently up into the sky when suddenly two men dressed in white stood beside them. They said, "Why do you stand here looking into the sky? This same Jesus who has been taken from you into heaven will come back in the same way you have seen him go into heaven." In order to understand Camp Nooksack, you have to understand what motivated the folks to come. Otherwise, you don't understand it. What motivated the circuit riders, and that's what they were, circuit riders of yesteryear, to leave their homes, to travel west, to preach in the frontier, traveling through the mud and adverse conditions. Anyone know when Washington State was founded? 89. I mean, this is just right in the, not the founding, but the recognition of Washington as a state. These folks believed that Jesus could return at any moment, and they took the command seriously to not look out, don't look out, but go out. And that's Camp Nooksack. Camp Nooksack, one of those places. So they went. They went where they were called, and some came to Nooksack. Camp Nooksack is actually one of 4 Advent Christian campgrounds established on the West Coast, at least 4 that I know of. Troutdale, Oregon is gone. Camp Santa Cruz is still in existence and completely transformed. And one in Southern California, the largest one, Camp Maranatha, which is similar to Cedar Springs or Warm Beach or something like that. But it's basically a sister campgrounds. Many of you probably didn't realize there were other campgrounds. In fact, I looked up just for fun. Camp meetings were a huge part of Advent Christians from the very foundation. And this summer, probably youth camps and family camps, there's 23 scheduled across the United States. So there still is some, continuation of the threads. Early Adventists were determined to get the message out that Jesus is coming soon. They did it through publications. They did it through a newfangled projection system, and that's what this is about. The point was to get the message out, and this is a stereopticon projector, and this was actually owned by my great-grandfather, William Snyder, and he went up and down the West Coast, including, undoubtedly, Camp Nooksack, with prophetic slides. Jesus is coming soon. They did it through publications, they did it through projections, and they did it through campgrounds. Again, what's the purpose? It's the message. The campground, that's just the means. Undoubtedly, this projector, sometimes called magic lantern, was at Camp Nooksack at some point in the 20s. So I bring it to emphasize that the message is most important. The projector, the publications, and the campgrounds were tools for the greater purpose. So if you don't understand the purpose, you can't really understand the campground. One of the early circuit riders sent to the Northwest was a man by the name of Edwin Carman. Carman name sound familiar? How many of you know someone named Carman? Or bunkers were in there too. So he was one of the original, and I believe Gabe Carman was a nephew to Edwin Carman. Is that correct?
Something like that.
Is that correct? Okay. Gabe died how many years ago? Well, he was 100.
Mm-hmm.
I know, I'm putting him on the spot. Okay.
I remember how many years ago, maybe 10.
More than that, more than 10.
You know where he got his name, Gabe?
No, I don't know how Gabe got his
He got
name.
his name Gabe in a hotel that his folks ran in Maple Falls because he was always talking. So the local people called him Gabriel.
Okay. It'll be a good thing to say,
But that's what people called him for all his years.
Elder Carman, took me a lot of years to understand. I've been reading bits and pieces of Advent Christian history. Elder Carman, Elder Matthews, Elder Stearns, Elder. Took me a long time to figure out elder is equivalent to what we would say pastor. I just didn't know that. Edwin Carman came from the East with his wife Emma, and interestingly, just a little factoid, that was his second wife, Emma, and his first wife was also named Emma. So he married 2 women named Emma. I had 3 children with Emma number 1, and as I understand it, some of the family had 3 more children then, and some of those children never did meet the first one, because, you come across. He accepted the calling to come to the Northwest and preach. And my mother's going to have to correct me if I'm wrong. You wouldn't answer your phone. Ethel came with them in a covered wagon. Is that true?
I think so, when she was 4 years old.
When she was 3 or 4 years old, and was she dumped in the drink? And it was a covered wagon. I'm making people think here. He accepted the call in the late 1880s, early 1890s. Here's his photograph. This is Emma, number 2. And I want to draw your attention, because this is just so fascinating to me. Down in the lower quadrant of this picture, you'll see a Bible bag. And this was given to him by friends sometime before 1890. It is so fascinating to me because here it is. Here's that Bible bag. Pass that around. And so this Bible bag, to me, is highly significant because Elder Carmen carried this around with him. He was a circuit rider. He went from place to place. He developed a circuit of places. And so, like, one place was Nimsville. Ever heard of Nimsville? East of Sumas. Schoolhouse. A Sunday school developed. That was the roots of the Sumas Church. He went into Vancouver. He went into Chilliwack. He was in Nooksack. This man was a circuit rider. He went around. People would know he was going to show up at a certain time on a certain day, once a month perhaps. He rode a horse. This is just a simple little thing. This is in the 100th anniversary of the Sumas Church. My brother carried the Bible bag in the parade, and he's playing Elder Carmen. It's just kind of fascinating. Trying to keep history alive.
Did you know the story that Elder never received money for his preaching?
Well, I'm not surprised.
He refused to accept money for his preaching, but he would take money for jobs that he could do. So if he could split wood at a place he was staying at, he could take pay for the wood, but not for the preaching.
Yeah, fascinating. He did have the 3 more children. Ethel is the oldest, Faye, and Lillian. And the baby in the picture is Ethel. And what's significant about that, and even why we have some of these things, is that when I was about 3 years old, my grandmother died. I never knew her. And my grandfather, Alvin Love, my mother's father, he remarried Ethel. No one had a better grandmother than I did, than Ethel. And so when I think about her story, and later when she grew up, she delivered, this is going beyond this, of course, but payroll up the Fraser Valley to the gold mines, to the miners, and wow, just an era.
And my grandfather was one of those miners.
And your grandfather is one of those miners. Very cool. What was his name?
Carl Ely.
Oh, Carl Ely.
Yeah.
It's very cool. Yeah. Yeah, so it's just part of the rich history, and so, Ethel, my grandmother, and Alvin, my grandfather, just tremendous people in my life. So Ethel came to the Northwest as a baby in a covered wagon. Eventually it became, Camp Nooksack. It was more the message. Early Adventists found receptive folks in rural Whatcom County. Elder Carmen developed a circuit, walking, riding a horse to share the message of the soon coming of Christ. And so, the different places that he went into Canada, all over the place, and Nooksack was on his route. Elder Carmen, among others, and it's not like it started, boom, one person, but it was a group of people. It helped establish Camp Nooksack, and it's really the camps that became the focal point of the message. And they would have people come and advertise. I don't know how they got the word out, but just some tremendous, amazingly. When I read some of the descriptions of the early meetings, it's like, wow, what a time that was. But this is the beginning. He helped. Here's one description. This is from a book, Devotion and Development by Clyde Hewitt. And this is just a description of the beginning. In 1896, at the northern edge of the state, Elder Carmen and others established the Advent Christian Conference of Western Washington, British Columbia. This was at Nooksack where they began a permanent annual camp meeting The grounds featured a six-sided tabernacle, 64 feet in diameter, seating 800 people. Can you believe it seats 800 people? When you were in that. And that's what it says.
Close. They sat close together.
Yeah, they sat close together. Commodious and well-appointed lodging house and dining rooms. No doubt because of these features, unrivaled elsewhere in the far west, Nooksack Campground was soon called the Alton Bay of the Pacific Coast, and they're just referring to another well-known campground from the other part of the country, whatever that other part is.
New Hampshire.
Pardon me? New Hampshire. Okay. New Hampshire. God, people know more than I do. So that is the beginning. Early Adventists, as I study the history, they did not really care about planting churches. They did not really care about congregations. It was the message they cared about. It was the idea and the emphasis of converting people to faith in Christ. That's why they were here. They thought Christ was going to come very soon, so there was no reason to become organized. But eventually, when Christ did not come, they had to become organized. And it's almost like the Advent Christian churches organized around the campgrounds. And so it's just kind of a fascinating part of the history. Churches and conferences grew up around the campgrounds because as time went on, Christ had not returned, so organization became a necessity. Here's another wonderful description of early pioneers who traveled to Nooksack. Mud and rain was everybody's experience in the climate of the Northwest Coast. On his first trip to the Pacific Coast, G.W. Cedarquist, wide-ranging Eastern and Southern evangelist and pastor, received a telegram to help dedicate a chapel in Nooksack. He was then in the Seattle-Tacoma area with Miles Grant. He said on his journey, his account of steaming up the sound, of trying to make his way overland in drenching rain, mud, among people who had never even heard of Nooksack, among other hardships, is an almost unbelievable recital of primitive conditions as late as 1890. Speaking of a Sunday evening service he held in Sumas and of people venturing out in a downpour of rain and mud up to their shoe tops, he wrote, a Christian lady came in the rain and mud a long distance through the woods carrying a small baby in her arms. Someone inquired why she ventured out in such a dreadfully dark night. Oh, she said, I am so hungry to hear a gospel sermon. I have not heard one for a long time, and I felt that I must come, Cedarquist continued. When I became acquainted with the circumstances and the distance she had traveled, it nearly overwhelmed me. In the 1890s, the message began to take root. The train was extended to Whatcom County all the way to Nooksack by 1890. I'm sure others can tell a little bit more about the train itself. Obviously, Nooksack was very much organized around the train and its history. And travel did become easier. The first Nooksack camp was in tents, and it seems to be 1893 as far as I can tell. This is a very early picture from 1898, and probably can't see it real well. We will pass it around, but there is a tent in the background, and this is before the building. 1898. I'll pass that one around again. The tabernacle, the main meeting room, was a tent. By 1896, the only building was a cookhouse. There are a few notes that exist of meetings in 1898. I have them in the red notebook back there. And by the way, if anyone wants to really read through this thick notebook back there, you can. I'm not gonna loan it out, but you can come visit me and have a cup of tea with me, and you can look at it. The only building was a cookhouse by 1896. The articles of incorporation are for the conference are dated 1900, but obviously they were informally organized before that. The tabernacle, the wonderful six-sided building. How many people remember the tabernacle? Surely all of you. Yeah, it became the focal point of the Nooksack campground for a little over 100 years. It was erected in 1899. Here's a description, a fascinating description from 1899, the very first meeting held in the tabernacle. Friday night, August 16, we held our first service in the new tabernacle, about 125 being present. Service was conducted by Brother Steers, Elder Hayward and others taking part. One dear friend, the husband of a sister from Seattle, who came for recreation only, cried for mercy and was happily saved. Saturday afternoon, Elder Jenks and wife arrived from Chicago. In the evening, Elder Hayward preached with the power of the Holy Spirit to a congregation of about 450. We had a blessed time in the Lord. Our tabernacle is easy to sing and speak in, and we have much reason to thank the Lord, which we do. We have a much larger number of camps on the ground than ever before. Sunday at 6 a.m. we had a blessed prayer meeting. At 10 a.m. we had a praise service in which a great number took part. At 11 a.m. Elder presented a grand sermon. There were between 600 and 700 people in the tabernacle, and nearly 100 are on the grounds besides. At 7:30 Elder Jenks spoke to 500 or 600, and the Spirit was present in power. The first meeting. Just a different time. Wonderful time. Baptisms were a huge part of the camp meeting. Here's a picture of the baptistry and the crowd that goes with it. And, you know, there's only a couple pictures I could find of the baptistry, and someone correct me if they know I'm wrong on this, but I believe Ernie Nolte told me he was baptized in the camp, at the campground at Camp Nooksack. For those of you who knew Ernie Nolte. And so I want to pass that one around him. My mother tells me that in the decades to come, that whenever they were to have a baptism and you could see it, they would have to clean it out first because it became quite dirty, including the frogs and and so, you know, that's okay. Different time. Here's a description of early meeting in 1901. So just a few years later, Nooksack, August 24, 1901, began the day with a good prayer meeting. Good meetings all throughout the day, and at night, 4 young girls and 1 young married woman came out on the Lord's side. Sunday, August 25, splendid sermon 11 by Brother Jenks, at the close of which 4 came forward. At 2:30, Brother Hayward gave an excellent service. By the way, Brother Jenks, that doesn't mean anything to most of you, but you?
Dr. James?
Yeah. Okay, tell me about him. Or you just remember?
I just remember he would come as an evangelist.
Right.
Yeah.
But what's significant about him is that at that time, Aurora College, he was one of the professors there.
Yeah.
And they would send all these people out and then later I have a description of one of the young people, and there was Dr. Stevens and Dr. Jenks, and when you read what classes they gave them, it's like, oh my stars, you know, what a different day. It's like, wow. And they were there partly, as Jim has pointed out, my brother, to help recruit to go to Aurora, at least in later years, because it was all just part of the system. Steers baptized 10 dear souls. Most of them were young people he has known since they were very young children. There were over 700 people attended these 2 services. Most of them were at the baptism. At the evening service, we had about the same size congregation. 1 young man came out on the Lord's side. Grand meetings throughout the week on September 2. Brother Jenks spoke every evening. We had good sermons and Bible readings through the same week that were soul-inspiring to the saints. Many manifested desires for salvation. Sinners were saved and backsliders reclaimed. Yesterday was the greatest day Nooksack ever saw. It was the largest gathering. There were about 750 in the tabernacle, at least 100 more on the grounds. At 3:30 we repaired to the water side where Brother Steers buried 6 dear souls in the watery grave. In the evening, dear Brother Jenks, who was at his very best, a number of souls came out brightly on the Lord's side, among them several bright young men, and their backslidden fathers and mothers squared things up with the Lord, and the tabernacle rang with praises to God. And on it goes.
One thing to remember here is that Nooksack City had less than 300 people. So there were a lot of people.
Yeah, about 400 was what I read.
Yeah. It was 1912 before they got 300 people in town.
And a lot of mad I keep reading. I actually have a list of names of some of the folks that were baptized in 1902. You can read them yourself, but a few of the names on the list, my grandmother, Ethel Carmen, is on that list. Annie Calander, 1902. Yeah. You knew her. Yeah. Annie Calander, Fritz, Scott, Brighton, Pauline, and Nettie Johnson. And there's others name on the list. Germaine was in there. There's also a list of converts in 1904. It's titled. Some of the names: Bailey, Lilyberry Van Buren, Sinberg, Elsieberg, some of your relatives, Bunker, more Calanders, Lillian Carmen, younger sister to my grandmother, Germaine. Camp meetings continued nonstop without a break for decades. There's a group photo for probably 2/3 of every year. Just that notebook back there is full of them. The ones that go back too many decades, the names will have been lost, but many people can still recognize them in the last 40 or 50, 60 years, 70 years even. There are photos extending into the 70s when the last Advent Christian camp met at Nooksack, Advent Christian. It continued after that. As the years went on, Nooksack grew up around the campground and the appeal was lost. The facilities were not up to what was desired. The cost of improving the campground with the sewer system, bathroom and rooms was prohibitive. And of course it was in Nooksack, and camps were going to more remote, in the woods. I mean, you don't leave Seattle for a retreat in Nooksack in 1975. It just wasn't going to happen this frequently. The Memory House was dedicated in 1948. There's one picture of the Memory House. Whoever lives there, we need to get some of these pictures to them. On the other side, what do I have on the other side of that? Oh, that's at the dining hall? No.
Yeah, 49 dining hall.
49 dining hall. So you can pass that one around. And this is from the 57 dining hall and dining hall. And I'm pretty sure in this picture, I know that person. That would be Mildred Gonzer. That's the middle person in that picture. I'm pretty sure that's Mildred. You tell me if I'm wrong, someone, but I think that's Mildred. The Memory House was first an idea in the early 40s, and I've read that it was built in 1948, and it was for the Women's Mission Society to have a place to meet out of the rain, it said. A Happy Row is added for a dormitory. I don't know when that came up, and groundkeeping homes were built. Of course, all those little buildings. Youth camps became huge at Camp Nooksack. The first one approximately 1924 and lasting into the 60s, as far as I can tell. There's lots of photographs of those camps. Vacation Bible School for children. I will show this one picture because it's me.
So youth camps were all the way to the 80s?
Were they all the way into the 80s? Okay.
Some of them.
Okay. Young People's Institute, were they still called YPI?
Oh, no, sorry.
And they had Vacation Bible Schools. Now, if I could only find me, we'll be good. See, there's me right there. And I know when you see this close up, you're going to say, wow, he hasn't changed a bit. That's me right there, Jim.
With a striped shirt on.
I guess, yeah, the smart-looking one. No, but I was thinking, coming Tuesday, I'm going to meet with a group of people to plan the SUMAS Vacation Bible School. I've been a part of either participant or leader in Vacation Bible School for of my 55 years, at least 40 years of it, and this is where it started. And so Camp Nooksack may not be there still, but what is allowed to happen continues. Camp Nooksack was my start. In the late 1960s, early 70s, a long-term lease was given to the American Sunday School Union. I'm sure you know more about those years than I do, Jim. And so, we can certainly add those stories if you would like to. As far as Advent Christian work goes, the grounds were never really utilized past the early 70s. In about 1994-95, I was at the meeting that voted to sell the campground to the Church of God, and the end of an era came. I came back to the area in 1991, so it's probably 93, 94, maybe 95. The Church of God, I don't know a lot about it other than when they had their big camp meetings and you would walk by, the singing was beautiful. Wasn't it? And if anyone's here that is part of that era, we're more than happy to include that as part of the historical record because that was certainly part of it.
Carl?
Yeah.
Advent Christian still had day camps up through the late 80s to the until we sold it. We did a week long, but it was just like evening services.
Okay, Advent Christians had evening service up through the 80s. Okay, so it did continue. You know, when the Church of God was there and I would walk by, I believe I saw lots of license plates from Ohio.
Oklahoma.
Where?
Oklahoma.
Oklahoma, up in Canada, Quebec maybe, and BC. I mean, they came from all over. No, so again, I'm as an outsider to, yes.
Rode up and talked to the other night after coming home from Wednesday night.
And did you want to say something? Yes.
Well, I was here in the 80s.
Okay.
And visited the camp. But I couldn't figure out what it was.
Okay.
They asked me to come and have a picnic.
Yeah.
My daughter came too. But we couldn't figure out who they were or what they were.
Yeah, from what you described, I'm pretty sure that was in the 90s because she described earlier to me that they wore the long dresses and that's the Church of God folks, and they took over in the mid-90s. And so, again, I don't know as much about them, but that describes them.
I didn't realize I was visiting place that was historical.
Okay.
I would have better look.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it really represents a movement across the United States going into every nook and cranny. There it was. I'd like to end this portion with a reading of some selections. It's actually quite long, so I would love to read the whole thing, but I want you to like me, so I won't. But this is actually a wonderful description from 1943 of a camper that came to the youth camp, the Young People's Institute in 1943. His name is William Bruce Isaac. He's about 18 when this is written, and he's writing from a description of, he's obviously come to Camp Nooksack from Seattle many years, and he's recollecting from 5 or 6 years previous. So I'm just going to read selections from this because it's such a wonderful description of what it was like. I purpose to tell in this writing a little of a camp where, for the last 10 consecutive years, I've had the great privilege of spending each year 10 of the most happy days of that year. If I were asked to describe the title Paradise to a spot on this present earth, I would without hesitation apply that title to the campgrounds, on the thought of which rest my most pleasant memories. I shall describe this camp by taking you with me to a session of the Western Washington, British Columbia Advent Christian Camp Meeting, or as it is affectionately called, Camp Nooksack. The advent of World War II has of necessity changed the camp, and so we will attend the year 1938. So we're in the year 1938 as he describes it. Wonderful writer. I'm not sure. I'd be interested to know how World War II changed the camp. Must have taken people away from being able to come or something like that. Obviously, that changed the whole world. Rationing. Okay. There are 3 things necessary at camp. Bed clothing, including several blankets, for the nights are cold no matter how hot the days. Personal clothing, toilet articles, and a swimming suit, and a cooperative spirit. These do not include an insignificant charge of $5.50 for room and board for the entire 10 days. We leave from the church in Seattle where our car has picked up the baggage of 6 boys and girls, including ourselves. Including our driver, there are now 7 excited people in the car, and we leave with our horns blowing to those on the curb who will soon follow to join us at camp. And he describes the trip up, and of course, when was I-5 built? I can't remember. Was it in the 60s?
65.
And so obviously the trip was before I-5, and he talks about Mount Vernon and along Chuckanet Drive, and 7 or 8 miles north of this city, we turn off the main highway to the left in the anticipation of world-famous Chuckanet Drive grows. I don't know what that is. Larrabee he talks about. And now we drive through the gate and under the trees to a stop in front of Happy Row. The suppressed enthusiasm of the occupants of the car joins that of the people who wait to greet us and the whole Nooksack Valley knows we're there. After a very restful sleep on mattresses filled with hay, we were awakened by the first rays of the morning sun as they pulled back the blanket of fog which had held so securely the earth in its rest of the night. We made no motion to arise, but lay parked in bed with our arms and head on the windowsill, absorbing the warm sunlight, was now causing the various insects and chipmunks to become alive. From across the fields came the crowing of the roosters and the tinkle of the cow's bells as they walked slowly to the barn for the morning milking. And then he describes just throughout the day, and I'm skipping about 2 pages. The classes of the morning were courses in the following subjects: the epistles of Paul, taught by Reverend T.P. Stevens, who was evening evangelist of this session of the camp meeting and who was president of our denomination college at Aurora, Illinois. A temperance lecture period taught by Mrs. Laurel Lee Isaac of Seattle, and who also served as YPI choir director, and studies in the New Testament prophecies, a course conducted by Prexy Jenks, who is president emeritus of Aurora College. So I thought, wow, we need to bring those back those days. Each session is more or less a lecture period, but each is also very informal, and questions and suggestions from the YPI are welcomed and received. It cannot be told sufficiently to impress fully on our minds how much fun the classes are to attend, but suffice it to say here that I cannot recall having been entirely bored with the class. Some, I will admit, but will point out as being only natural, were less interesting than others. But all in all, they were not a waste of time in any sense, educational or otherwise. The noises of the dining hall, 10 or more minutes before the hour of 2, the baseball field was alive with boys and girls eager for baseball and volleyball. By the way, the old baseball field is where the condos sit on 2nd Street, right across from where the main grounds were. The 2 main sports were baseball and volleyball, and horseshoes, ping pong, and less active games. After a few moments, the 2 9-man softball teams consisting of 14 or 15 players each had been chosen, an umpire drafted, and the game started. Girls as well as boys were playing. Indeed, one team had a girl pitcher of by no means small skill. With the approach of the hour of 3:30, the more aggressive of the Young People's Institute laid siege to the sports director until he promised to chaperone a hike to the old swimming hole. Upon gaining his assent, the group scattered and with whoops of elation ran to their rooms to don swimming suits. 3:30 found them well on the way, walking down past the church, through the 2-block metropolitan center of Nooksack, Washington, across the railroad tracks, down the gravel road, and past the grade school and the tennis courts, which were patronized at the moment by several of our number, but which gave them up as they joined the parade. Down the road we walked and turned in a gate in the fence which closed behind the field. We walked with an increased gait down a well-beaten path over a small bridge and finally stopped at the familiar sucker hole. Soon the peaceful, cold mountain waters were disturbed by gleeful, gaudily clad kids.
That swimming hole now.
Where is the swimming hole now? Breckenridge Creek. Yeah.
Oh, the little...
You know what? I bet some of these ladies will be happy to walk down the path with you. Yeah, you go across the railroad track up towards the cemetery and somewhere back in there.
Because that's where I live, right in there.
Yeah. Many of the people stayed to talk with friends. Many had to return to their farms, and a goodly number of the older folks from the YPI went to the separate campfire services. The adult campfire in the new social hall, the young folks' fire was in the grove on the south end of the grounds. Underneath the stars, surrounded by tall evergreen trees whose branches whispered quiet all night. Surrounding the fire on all sides save one, the young people sat on logs or stood in the darkness, eyes intently fixed on the fire. The indescribable beauty of the scene had quieted the hearts and minds of all, and the choruses were of a more subdued spirit. A final chorus, taps, and then we left the grove. The boys escorted the girls to the dormitory, and after wishing them a good night's sleep and chiding Mother Dale, and that's someone you refer to, but I skipped those parts, for sending them to bed so soon, returned to the south end of the camp to their cabins. Inside they found the other fellows engaged in traditional gymnastics and calisthenics. Some were watching one of their number do push-ups while others were admiring another as he chinned himself. After donning flashy pajamas, the older ones joined in the fun, which lasted for quite some time. The fun was halted by the appearance of Pop, who, after checking up on the camp and finding all secure, returned to remind us that the lights out occurred at 10:30. Since it was only 11:15, he wasn't too harsh with us, and stayed long enough to tell us a little of his experience during the First World War. We turned in at 12 and awaited being taken in the arms of Morpheus, watching the stars, the 2 or 3 lights from the distance, and studying the shapes and shadows of the darkness. And then came sleep, who dropped the curtain of unconsciousness and breathed a vapor of refreshing dreams on our weary minds. The persons who conceived the idea of camp meeting must certainly have had in mind the Bible verse which states that Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. It can be readily seen how the fourfold life is characteristic of the encampment. Many will testify, and I with them, that of all the forces which affected their Christian experience, the largest and most important single force was Camp Nooksack. William Bruce Isaac, Seattle, Washington, 1943. And then someone added this footnote to the essay, and I had to read it many times so I wouldn't cry. William Bruce Isaac was killed in action somewhere in Germany, November 21, 1944, age 19 years, 7 months, 25 days. Isn't that beautiful? And you know what? Camp Nooksack may not be there, but the purpose continues. You and I can do the same thing for people. And who cares about the campground? We care about people. We care about being changed. That's what we care about. I mean, what else matters? Camp Nooksack, it's all worth it. Amen?
Amen.
It's a place that lives. It is a place that, it's changed people. In my own work at Sumas in the foothills around the valley, I no longer ride a horse like Elder Carmen. I don't do that. I don't have to slog through the mud, although sometimes it gets pretty messy. The campground is a memory. But what Elder Carmen and countless others began in our community is carried on, just a different form. It's the same message of hope and transformation that's still needed as we wait for the coming of Jesus Christ. So, thank you for Camp Nooksack. Thank you for the memories. Thank you for the gift of hope. So,
the American Sunday School Union signed the lease. Joel Douglas had a little conflict with the Seattle people because they had developed another camp down in Seattle. And they didn't want to travel to Nooksack anymore, so they wanted to close Nooksack so the Nooksack could come down there. Well, the Nooksack people weren't really strong, so he found that the American Sunday School Union would like to use that facility for longer periods of time than just the summer. And so he had them sign a 20-year lease. So the school campground existed for another 20 years under the American Sunday School Union. Part of that lease was that the Advent Christians had, I think, 2 weeks a year free use of the campground.
Something like that.
So they could hold a regular camp, which I went to much younger. Well, Hazel remembers going to that much younger when a young man named Evan Wright was going there too. Were you one of the young ladies that he escorted to the Happy Roast so that...
Well, no. But I came when we were married. And
so you were married.
So that was my first experience.
My wife's mother was a cook camp during those 20 years, or most of them. So my wife remembers a lot about the last 20 years. Of course, she was in Bellingham by that time. I wasn't married to her then. She was married to Helmer then. So, but anyhow, that kept it alive. And then when as soon as the lease expired, they prevailed upon the Adventists to get rid of the campground. And the Church of God came into the picture and took it over and had a few good years there before it was sold. And then, of course, Joel and I tried to get the Nooksack to preserve it as a historical site.
City of Nooksack to preserve it.
Yeah, the City of Nooksack. Yeah, the City of Nooksack. But they did not vote to do that. So it was sold, and Tabernacle supposedly was torn down to be able to be reassembled. Where it went, I have no idea. I think somebody should prevail on much, at least get the historical plaque back that used to be on the side of the tabernacle.
Anyone know where it is? The puzzle of the tabernacle?
Joe Bronson said that somebody ended up with the lumber and built a barn or something out of it.
Okay.
That's what he had heard anyway from somebody.
It was taken down in sections. I have pictures of it being taken down in sections, because it was an octagonal building, and they took down 8 sections, and they transported the 8 sections away intact, including 8 sections of the roof. So it was taken apart so it could be reassembled, but there weren't many of us that assumed that it would ever be reassembled. But I assume that somebody got the plaque someplace, but I don't know where it is.
Put it on Facebook.
Yeah.
What?
Facebook. Where is that plaque?
The conference got the campground back for a couple years before they sold it to the Sunday School Union, because I ended up, by default, being kind of a caretaker.
Right. Yeah, there was a couple of years that they were, before they found the American Sunday School Union as a viable financial.
After the Sunday School Union, before they sold it to Church of God,
right.
I ended up being, because I was the only one around that knew how to do anything, I guess. So I ended up, I remember we had a big windstorm, and we had a couple of work days where we hauled truckloads of branches and things away. A big tree fell down and took down the bell tower, all that kind of stuff. And we kept it up until they sold it.
Some of the small buildings, the housing buildings, were sold, but they couldn't move them because they were so full of termites. There was nothing left. So to have restored all that would have been impossible.
Can I ask before we continue, do we want a break? What do you think? Because what I was going to do with the rest of the time was just ask for stories. I have several pages of
Let's go ahead and break.
stories. You want to go on a break? Okay.
Okay, we're going to take a break. I encourage you to get up, stretch your legs, help yourself to refreshments. If you don't see something you need, let us know. If you come up with a good memory during this time, hang on to it and bring it back so we can record it.